All right, there we
So,
go.
like,
Everything's working.
okay.
Now, what was your question again, sir?
Yeah. So, like, do you agree that like God like possesses the divine attributes of like omniscience, omnipresence, and omnipotence? Like, do we agree with God being that?
Well, I agree with that, sir, but now we have to define some terms. What do you mean by omnipotent, omnipresent, and omniscient? What do you mean by those terms?
Okay. So here we go. So for omnipotence, right? Philosophically, there have been like different interpretations and definitions of omnipotence by like different
That's why I'm
theologians.
asking you, sir.
Yeah, yeah. And for example, Saint Aquinas defines it as like the ability to like bring forth any possible state of affairs, and then Descartes thinks it's any state of affairs, even if it's impossible. So it's really like it's up to you what definition of omnipotence you want to go for. Because I want to
No,
hear like
sir. No, sir,
I
it's
want to hear
not.
your conception of God. Like I want like I'm not trying to disprove my conception of God. I want to know what your conception of God is, and I want to be able to like disprove specifically your conception. So
Okay, sir. Once again, I don't care about Kant or Descartes. I'm not debating them. I'm debating you. And I ask you, what definition of omnipotent, omnipotent, omniscient, and all these different terms you're using, what is the terms that you are using, sir? Since I'm discussing this with you, I need to know where you're coming from so we can move forward.
okay, so I'm defining omnipotence as like the ability to bring forth any logical state of affairs. So if something is logically contradictory, then God would still like not bring it forth, even though He's omnipotent. That's my definition of omnipotence.
Okay,
Uh,
great. I agree with that. God can do any logically possible thing. Now, God cannot do the logically impossible. God cannot create a one ended stick. He cannot create a square circle. He cannot create a married bachelor. He cannot
yeah,
create military intelligence. Haha, that's a joke. Anyway, God cannot violate the laws of logic. Why would that
yeah.
be, sir?
I'm in agreement with that because that's like my definition of omnipotence.
Oh, great.
So
But I
I
asked you
want
another question, sir. Why? Why can he not violate those laws of logic?
uh laws of logic would essentially be like natural to him. Like if we were to conceive of a universe with God, then like is like essentially the laws of logic would bind him in the same way that God wouldn't be able to like actualize something that is evil, let's say, because if he does that, then he's going against his own nature. So that's pretty much why like his own nature binds him. Because the reason like the law of identity binds him is that if he does that, then he's no longer God, and he can't no longer be God. Therefore, God can do anything that still makes him God, which is what doesn't violate the laws of logic.
I love working with professionals like yourself, sir. That's quite correct. I say it a little differently, but what you're saying is quite correct. These attributes, these laws of logic, are attributes of God. They're how God's mind thinks. God's mind is logical. God's mind is mathematical. That's why he cannot violate the law of identity. That's why he cannot create a rock so large that he himself cannot lift it, or a taco so large that he himself cannot eat it. Because then, if he could do such a thing like that, then he would no longer be all powerful, and that would negate him being the God of creation. So, good job. So, let's continue down that line, sir. What is your question about omnipotence?
Oh, so I was just like asking what, like outside of this debate, like, well, I already like know the answer to this because you answered it, but I was initially asking you what like type of omnipotence you believed in, and now I
Mm-hmm.
do. But uh, for example, Descartes believes in a different type of omnipotence, so I'm just like I was confused as to how you defined it, but now we've
Okay.
established that. So yeah, um, we can like move on to like omniscience.
Omniscience,
Uh,
okay.
Omniscience. Yeah, I'm sorry. Um, so how do you? Well, do you want me to like give my definition of
Please do.
omniscience? Okay, so I just define it as like having like knowledge of all truths, like the set of all truths, being like knowledgeable about it. That would constitute omniscience or omniscience. Um, do you
Okay.
agree with that definition?
God knows all truth propositions. That's the way it's worded in the realm of philosophy. God knows all truth propositions, but God does not know all things. Okay? Now, I'll give you an example. Just like God is omnipotent, he's omnipotent in his omniscience. In his omnipotence, he can do everything except those things that would negate his very existence. So, God is holy. He is sinless. So, in the same occurrence, when you're talking about omniscience, God knows that there are such things as sinners, but God does not know what it is to be a sinner. You see what I'm saying, sir? God knows that we've sinned and we've lied and we've stolen and we've cheated, and God knows that we have done those things. God knows what those things are by definition. But God doesn't know what it experientially what it is to be a liar, a thief, a fornicator, a homosexual. God does not know that. Do you understand that part of it?
Yes. So,
okay.
Mr. Batman, I don't consider these experiences to be propositions, so they would be excluded from my definition of omniscience. Because I believe that, like, in the philosophy of mind, we consider these things like phenomenological experiences, and these experiences wouldn't necessarily be like tethered to propositions. They are more of things that, like, subjects, like in a possible world, subjects would be what would essentially process these things. So they would not be a part of, like, what we consider propositions. So I would take a non-cognitive stance to that. So I think, like, we're in agreement about my definition of omniscience.
Okay. And how can we move forward now, sir?
Yeah, so do you agree? So since we've established that, like, God is aware of the set of all truths, that would by necessity include the superset of all truths. Is that true?
What do you mean by superset of all truths, sir?
Do you know what a mathematical superset is?
I am familiar with it, sir, but what do you mean by it?
Oh, well, it's not a my definition thing. It's more of a, like, just established mathematical definition. So in this case, right, when we have a set, we can divide it into several subsets, correct? Like, if we have 1, 2, 3 in a given set, we'll call that set A. Then we'll have several subsets, A1, A2, A3, and these subsets would include different sets included in that set. For instance, if we have the set A, 1, 2, 3, we would have set A1, which would be just the number 1, and then set A2, which is 1, 2, and then set A3, which is 0, 1, 2, 3. So all these sets would already be, like, presumed to exist in the initial set, and these would be called subsets. Now, a superset is a combination of all given subsets plus the initial set, right? So a superset of A would be A plus A1, A2, and A3 all in one set, and that's what we call a mathematical superset.
Okay, so in this scenario of 1, 2, 3, and then different sets of these, what you're talking about, we're still talking about a superset of base 10 mathematics. Would you agree with that? That would be base 10 mathematics, and that would be the ultimate superset of everything you're talking about in relationship to numerical counting?
Wait, mind you elaborate on that? What do you mean by like a superset of what okay, so, like, a superset isn't, it's not like it's including, like, necessarily the hexadecimal base. Like, we could have the same superset if we're operating under a different base. What I'm saying is that the superset is just all the subsets plus the initial sets, right? And this would be the case regardless of whether, like, we're operating on base 10 or 6 or 16.
Okay, so once again, though, in our example of what we're using, we are using the base 10 set. Would you agree with that?
Sure.
Okay, so would that be the ultimacy of the superset, or would that be outside of the superset itself?
How would... Wait.
Would you not need the laws of base 10 mathematics in order to understand the set and the supersets that you're referring to? Or is base 10 mathematics the superset, the ultimacy of the superset that you're referring to?
Well, in this case, base 10 mathematics is just like an axiom, right? Like, we essentially, like, you know the whole trilemma, like the trilemma of epistemologic knowledge? You either get into regression or a circular a circular argument or axioms. And so in this case, in mathematics, you just boil down to axioms if you reduce all mathematical claims.
I'm sorry, sir. Can you explain to me what is an axiom according to your worldview?
An axiom is essentially okay. Once again, this is not necessarily my worldview. It's just what logicians agree what an axiom is, and it's essentially just a claim that doesn't necessarily have to be substantiated. It's just a claim that's agreed upon. Like for instance, law of non-contradiction. That's just axiomatic. Right?
Really? So if everybody didn't agree with the law of non-contradiction, it would no longer exist?
It would still exist, right? But
so then you just refuted your own definition, sir. You realize that, right?
Well, I can give you a different example of this, right? For instance, we perceive an apple to be on a tree, right? And the apple being on the tree is irrelevant to our perception. So here we have what is real, right? And what our perception of reality is. Our perception of reality can be contingent on things like whether we have good vision, so on. But reality itself isn't contingent on that. And so the axiom is really just contingent on what we ourselves believe. But the actual reality, what is true and what is real, isn't contingent on what we ourselves believe to be true. And that's how we and that's how you apply the law of non-contradiction to what you said. For instance, it could be our axiom that the law of non-contradiction is true, or it could be our axiom that it is false, depending on what we believe. However, the truth of this law is irrelevant to our perception of it.
Okay, hang on a second. So, the law of non-contradiction is axiomatic. Axioms exist in the mind, because you said one person could say it's true according to their worldview, and another person could say it's false. So that's axiomatic. Now, wait a minute, sir. The law of non-contradiction is always the same thing. A cannot be not A at the same time in the same way. If you were to say your car is and is not in the parking lot right now, and I was to say my car is and is not in the parking lot right now, and I was to say my statement is true, can your statement be false? No. No, it can't be, sir. So, once again, if you're going to say that these laws are axiomatic, which means they come from a mind, and the laws of logic don't ever change over time, can you point me to a mind that is eternal, universal, and unchanging, that is, it never changes over time? Because we need these laws of logic. These are the necessary preconditions for intelligibility. So, can you tell me a mind that never changes over time, of which these axioms you're talking about come from?
So I have two objections with what you said.
Okay.
My first objection is that I believe you misrepresented my argument. I'm not saying the actual laws of logic are necessarily contingent on our minds. I'm saying that our belief in what the laws of logic are what's contingent on us, right? And these beliefs are what we call axioms.
Okay, hang on a second right there. Stop right there for just a second. Okay. You said you disagreed with me. Okay, fine. Let's go down that path. How, without the law of identity being universal, eternal, and unchanging, how did you identify the disagreement? Then you're going to also have to have the law of non-contradiction, so you can compare and contrast the things you do agree with versus the things you don't agree with. Now you're also going to have to have the law of the excluded middle, because it's either true you disagree with me or it's not. So, once again, sir, where do these laws of logic come from? Because they are absolute necessities of our ability to have this conversation. What causes these laws to exist? What causes these laws not to change over time? Because every argument that we ever have is going to be based on these laws functioning the way they do. And what's going to cause these laws to be here again tomorrow, so you and I can have this lovely discussion one more time. And I must say, Mr. Monty, I'm enjoying this quite thoroughly, because you are one of the few people I've run across that's actually given me a good discussion. Thank you, sir, for this.
Okay, you are welcome, right? And I named two objections, so I couldn't name the second one, right? But I'll get into the second one, right now. What I was saying by our beliefs of these axioms are different than what they actually are is, for example, right? In quantum physics, you must have heard of quantum superposition, right? And it's when a particle could be in two states. Now, people, right, scientists have tried giving it a solution in classical logic, and they did, right? But also, quantum physicists have actually used paraconstant logic to deal with quantum superposition as well. And paraconstant logic is a logical system that does not uphold the axiom of the law of non-contradiction. And we have like several logical systems that uphold different axioms. For instance, fuzzy logic, which essentially
Sir,
upholds.
Sir, if I may, I don't mean to be interrupting you like this, because I try not to do that, especially when you're talking about stuff I really love to talk about. Quantum mechanics is one of the new things I've been learning quite a bit about. But unfortunately, sir, you're absolutely wrong. How do you identify quantum mechanics? How do you identify a quantum? How do you identify that particles exist in two places simultaneously, or one particle comes into existence, or then all of a sudden it goes out of your perception? How do you identify that without the law of identity? You see, even quantum mechanics requires the necessary preconditions for intelligibility, because if you did not have the basic laws of logic in order to discuss quantum mechanics, it would be irrelevant. So, sir, even if you go into the quantum realm, you're still using the three basic laws of logic. So let's stick with this necessary precondition for intelligibility, communication, and functionality. Because if you do not have the law of identity working exactly the way it does, always the way it does, without any change, then guess what? You don't get. You don't get functionality in the physical world, because the law of identity not only is A, something is what it is and it cannot be what it is not, but it also gives us classifications of things, categories, and labels. Now, without classifications of things, categories, and labels, you cannot have cause and effect relationships between things. Let me give you an example. Without a classification of thing like a photon, then that classification of thing cannot affect another classification of thing called your retina, to send another classification of thing called a signal to the fourth classification of thing called your brain, so you can have a fifth classification of thing called the thought of what it is I'm saying to you. See how that works? So without the law of identity, you don't get the law of cause and effect, which means you can't understand the words coming out of my mouth. So, once again, sir, where do these laws come from? The law of identity, non-contradiction, and excluded middle. That's what causes them to be. Excuse me, let me mute this turkey because we're having a nice discussion right now, and I don't want anybody interrupting it. Now, Mr. Monty, what causes... sir, if I have to mute you again, I will ban you. Do not make me ban you. Now, I don't want to do that. So remain silent while Mr. Monty and I are having a good discussion here. So once again, we have to have these laws in place. They are necessary preconditions of not only our ability to intelligibly communicate, but they are also the necessary preconditions of functionality in our physical world. So, number one, in cause-effect relationships. What causes these laws to be in place? What causes them not to change over time? And what's going to cause them to be here again tomorrow so we can enjoy the effects of these laws one more time, sir? Sorry about that, Mr. Monty. I think that idiot actually booted me out of the room. I don't know if you heard what I said. Again, let me just... Okay, this just concisely. Once again, you cannot avoid these necessary preconditions for intelligibility. And this is the laws of identity, non-contradiction, and excluded middle. Even the quantum realm requires these things, sir. Yes, are there other types of logic that are in quantum mechanics? Absolutely. I agree with that wholeheartedly. Won't even give you an argument on that, sir. But even those laws of logic are dependent upon the necessary preconditions for intelligibility and for functionality of our physical world. Without that laws of identity, non-contradiction, and excluded middle, our physical world no longer functions because you don't get cause and effect relationships. So, once again, sir, what causes these laws to exist? What causes these laws not to change over time in a world that's constantly changing over time because of the second law of thermodynamics, another pesky law that never changes over time, that everything decays over time? And what's going to cause these laws to be here one more time so you and I can continue this lovely discussion tomorrow if we so choose to do so?
Okay. So I think you kind of repeated this sufficiently for me to understand your question. So just I would ask of you to not repeat yourself 3 times next time, but respectfully.
Sorry, I do apologize, sir, but I was kicked out of the room and did not know at which point I was kicked out.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that. I'm new to the server, so I'm not sure who disrupted this conversation. So
oh, he's gone. I banned him.
Yeah, but back to what I was saying, right? Yes. So the point that I brought up, right? It's essentially I wasn't saying that, for instance, all the axioms of classical logic wouldn't be there in let's say in quantum mechanics. What I'm saying is that in this case, specifically, the law of non-contradiction doesn't have to be entertained. We've made systems where that law isn't being entertained. So I'm not saying that.
Actually, sir, once again, you're wrong.
Yeah, hold up. So, your response was showing why the law of identity necessarily has to be entertained, right? And I could agree with the law of identity being entertained in quantum mechanics, but I believe that the fact that quantum physicists have essentially employed paraconstant logic does in fact depict that not all these axioms are necessary.
Sir, I'm just going to have to interrupt you one more time. These are not simply axioms that exist in your mind. I've already demonstrated that these laws of logic, these 3 basic laws of logic, including the law of non-contradiction, is necessary even in the quantum realm, sir. Because either they can compare and contrast things in the quantum realm, or they cannot. It's either true that they're looking at a quark or a quantum, or they're not. That's the law of the excluded middle. So once again, sir, and they can identify these things. That's the law of identity. So, sir, even in the quantum realm, everything is dependent upon these foundational laws of logic. Let me ask you a question, sir. How many foundations are in any building?
What do you mean? I'm not an expert on architecture, so I can't
Oh, okay. Let me ask you a question, sir. Are you familiar with your own home?
Sure.
Great. How many foundations are in your home?
I'll just say 4.
There would be 1 foundation, sir. The foundation is what everything else is built upon. Now, the foundation for intelligibility, for knowledge, for functionality is these laws of logic. Because without these laws of logic, you don't get the functionality that we require in the physical world. So everything boils down. You say that they're simply axiomatic, that they don't have a cause, they just happen to be here. Wait a minute, that doesn't work. Because we know that they are here, but they're not self-existent, they're not self-explanatory, and they sure as heck don't tell us where time, space, and matter comes from. So what causes these laws to be? What causes them not to change over time? What's going to cause them to be here tomorrow?
So, MrBATMAN, right. Essentially, the law that I contested was the law of non-contradiction. I believe that even your initial response wasn't even against the idea of paraconstant logic being entertained in quantum mechanics.
I'm sorry, sir. How did you identify the law of non-contradiction without the law of identity? Sir, if all you're going to do is dodge the question, I'm not going to talk to you anymore, sir.
I'm going to give you a response.
How are you going to give me a response, sir?
Different call, please. Because people are trying to have debates. We don't want to hear about this discussion.
No, but
we are having a debate, sir. If you don't like it, you go to a different room. So, once again, sir, you understand, sir, that everything that you do, Mr. Monty, everything that you do requires these necessary precondition for intelligibility and functionality. Okay?
Please let me claim my time. You've interrupted me several times by now. So
okay, sir. Well, I'm tired of you not answering the question, so if you're not going to answer the question, I'll just call it a day.
If you keep interrupting me, I'm not going to be able to answer your question.
Great. So where do these laws come from so you can understand that you don't want to answer my question?
I understand your question, right? Let me reply to you so that I can respond to your question. If you keep interrupting me, that's never going to happen. So I would kindly ask you to not speak until I am finished speaking.
Okay, sir. As long as when you're speaking, Mr. Monty, you're answering my query. Answer the question, sir. Where do these laws come from? What causes them to be? Because you need them even in the quantum realm, including the law of non-contradiction. I'm sorry, sir. I'm going to have to mute you. Once again, sir, I'm going to mute you now because you're over-talking me. So, once again, sir, I need you to answer the question. What causes these laws of logic to exist? Because you need them even in the quantum field, sir. Even in quantum mechanics requires these laws of logic. Now, where do these laws come from? That's number one. What causes them to be? What causes them not to change over time in an ever-changing world? And what's going to cause them to be here again tomorrow, one more time, so you and I can have this lovely conversation again? Now, once again, sir, that is the question. I need you to answer that question. Don't make up another question that I didn't ask. Don't make an answer to a question I didn't answer. Go.
Yeah. Mr. Batman, I would start by saying, wrist, fucking dumbass. Let me fucking speak, dumbass. Holy shit.
There we go. Have a nice day, sir. Repent or perish. You're on your way to hell. Next.
Ayo, Smiley. Ayo, Smiley. Ayo, Smiley.